Fairy tales have always told us what should happen. But what if the story took another turn? What if the ugly duckling never became a swan? What if Cinderella never went to the ball? What if beauty never broke the beast's curse? What if Aladdin freed the genie first? And what if the little mermaid never gave up her voice? In season 1 of What If, we step into 5 reimagined worlds where the familiar becomes unexpected. And the endings are not what you remember. Because sometimes the most magical question is simply, what if? Have you ever heard the story of the ugly duckling? But what if that duckling never turned into a swan? Imagine a different version where true worth comes not from appearance but from resilience and a brave heart. And today, we will step into the journey of a very different little duck. Once upon a time, on a small farm by the village, under the bright summer sun, a mother duck patiently sat on her nest. She spent many long days dreaming of the moment when tiny cheep-cheep sounds would fill the air. The farm was peaceful, with the breeze brushing through wildflowers. Frogs croaked by the pond, as if sharing her anticipation. Mother Duck whispered softly, "Everything will be fine. Soon my little ones will come into this world." One morning, golden sunlight bathed the farm. The eggs trembled softly, then crack, crack. Plump yellow ducklings popped out one after another. They wobbled on tiny feet, their down shining like sunlight. Mother Duck cried with joy, gathering her newborns under her wings. The whole farm seemed lively. Even the hens peeked over, clucking their congratulations. Tiny chirps echoed everywhere, marking a beginning full of life. But one egg still had not hatched. It was much larger than the others, its shell thick and heavy. Mother Duck waited patiently, day after day, her eyes full of hope. The little ducklings chirped eagerly, "Mom, why hasn't our sibling come out yet?" She gently answered, "Every child needs their own time." Then one afternoon, the egg trembled, shaking harder and harder. Everyone fell silent, waiting for a miracle. Crack, crack! The last egg finally broke. Out came a tall, gangly duckling, covered in gray feathers, with awkward wings. It looked completely different, gazing around with sad, searching eyes. The golden siblings whispered, "Why does it look so different from us?" Mother Duck froze for a moment, but spread her wings wide. "You are part of this family." The little duckling lowered its head, feeling both safe and frightened. Immediately, whispers spread across the yard. The chickens squawked, "Oh, look, how ugly it is!" A hen laughed, "Long beak, messy feathers. It doesn't look like a duck at all." Laughter spread through the farm, cutting into the young duckling's heart. It blushed, its heart pounding, wishing it could hide away. Mother Duck tried to shield it with her wings, but the mocking words lingered like sharp knives. Mother Duck gazed at her different child, filled with both love and worry. "You are just as precious as the others," she whispered. Though fear flickered in her eyes, she knew the world was harsh to anything that didn't fit in. The duckling pressed its head against her feathers, seeking warmth. But deep in its heart, it already sensed the loneliness waiting ahead. From morning to night, the duckling tried to follow its siblings, but whenever it got close, they scattered away. Some even pecked harshly at its back. "Go away, ugly thing!" The duckling stayed silent, lowering its head, never daring to argue. It wished just once to run and swim, together like the others. Yet each time it tried, it was pushed out of the circle. Its little heart grew heavier day by day. Night fell, and the farm was wrapped in darkness. The golden ducklings slept peacefully in their mother's embrace. The gray duckling hid quietly beside a haystack, its sad eyes glistening under the moon. It still heard the cruel laughter of the day, echoing like knives in its heart. The night wind blew through the barn, chilling its feathers. Curling up, it whispered to itself, "Why am I so different?" One morning, as the sun rose, the gray duckling quietly left the flock. Looking back at its mother, its eyes filled with tears. "Maybe I don't belong here." Its heart ached, but it was determined to find a place to call home. With trembling steps on the dirt road, it whispered, "Somewhere out there must be a place for me." And so, its journey began. Across the field, the duckling saw a fat cat dozing in the sun. Excited, it waddled closer. "Hello, may I sit with you?" The cat opened one eye, glaring sharply, and hissed, "Ugly thing, stay away from me." The duckling jumped back, heart sinking. "Even when I only want a friend," it thought sadly, "it seems impossible." It wandered on, crossing a small path, when a big dog growled. Trembling, the duckling said, "Please, let me rest here for a while." The dog barked loudly, "Get out! This place has no room for ugly freaks." The sound made the duckling panic, running as fast as it could. Gasping for breath, heart pounding, it felt the weight of its loneliness even more. After being driven away again and again, the duckling sank down by a ditch. The water reflected its gray, lonely figure. "Maybe I truly don't belong anywhere," it thought, its vision blurred with tears. Yet a spark lit inside. "I haven't found my place yet, but I will not give up." The sadness remained heavy, but a small flame of determination began to burn. One afternoon, by a pond, the duckling heard cheerful singing. On a small branch, a sparrow chirped, "Hello, little duck. Why do you look so sad?" The duckling hesitated. "Everyone says I'm ugly. No one wants to be with me." The sparrow smiled. "You don't need to look like anyone else. Just be yourself." Those words were like a warm breeze blowing away dark clouds. For the first time in days, the duckling smiled. It felt its heart lighten, as if someone finally understood. The sparrow fluttered around, singing more cheerful tunes. The duckling looked up at the sky, its eyes shining. Maybe there is still hope. The rippling water beneath the pond echoed softly, blending with the warmth rising in its chest. But the joy was short-lived, for the harsh winter arrived. Snow covered the fields, and winds cut like knives. The duckling shivered, its weak wings unable to keep warm. It searched desperately for shelter, but everywhere was frozen. The night grew darker, snow falling heavily, bearing the tracks it left behind. In its heart, it wondered, "Can I survive this?" In desperation, the duckling found a haystack near the barn. It burrowed deep inside, wrapping dry leaves around its body for warmth. Each breath came out as a puff of white smoke in the icy air. The howling wind outside sounded like invisible monsters lurking nearby. But within the cold and darkness, the duckling forced its eyes shut, hoping morning would come. Night after night, snowstorms swept through. The wind whistled through the cracks of the barn, making the duckling tremble. Sometimes it thought, "Maybe I won't make it." But each morning, its eyes opened again. It was still alive. Every day of survival was a small victory. In hardship, it was learning resilience. Hungry, it risked venturing to the pond to catch fish beneath the ice. The freezing water numbed its legs, but it pushed on. Every bite of food it found felt like a treasure. It taught itself to live independently, relying only on its own strength. In hardship, it discovered an inner power it had never known before. Often, when it looked up at the winter sky, the duckling saw flocks of birds flying in formation. They beat their wings strongly, singing into the air. Tears welled up as it whispered, "I'll never be like them." Yet it tightened its weak wings, determined, "I must live. I cannot give up." In its sad gray eyes, a small flame of courage began to glow. At last, the endless winter passed. The duckling emerged from the freezing days, thinner but with brighter eyes. It had endured storms and still stood tall. Each step was clumsy, yet filled with strength. It realized, "I have changed. I have grown stronger." Spring returned, filling the farm with songs of birds and breezes. Flowers bloomed, painting the land in color. The duckling looked at the clear sky and felt it was a new beginning. It decided to return to the farm where it was born. Its heart pounded, half afraid, half hopeful. When it returned, it still wore its gray feathers and walked awkwardly. But in its eyes, fear no longer lingered. Instead, there was confidence and strength. It was no longer the trembling duckling of last summer. Now, it was a survivor, brave and unyielding. The chickens in the yard whispered again, "Look, the ugly duckling has come back." Some smirked, ready to mock as before. But the duckling no longer hid, no longer lowered its head. It walked straight and tall across the farmyard. The whispers suddenly lost their power. The duckling quietly stepped to the pond. It dove into the water, swimming with strong strokes, its wings stirring little waves. The cool water embraced its gray body, but this time it felt no shame. Its heart raced, every stroke declaring, "I am myself." The animals around the pond watched in surprise, no longer mocking as before. An old goose, who had seen many winters, slowly nodded. "It's still different," the goose said, "but it's strong and resilient. That is what truly matters." The words echoed through the yard, silencing every creature. The duckling lifted its head, feeling recognized for the first time. A spark of pride began to grow inside. Day by day, the duckling did more than survive. It helped others. It taught the younger ducklings to swim, patiently guiding each one. When food was found, it shared freely, never keeping it all. These small acts slowly changed how others saw it. From being rejected, it had become a pillar of support for the flock. One summer morning, as the sun rose, the sky filled with beating wings. A flock of pure white swans soared overhead, magnificent and free. Every creature on the farm looked up in awe. The duckling also lifted its gaze, eyes shining, heart pounding. In that moment, memories of its lonely days rushed back. It saw the swans, breathtaking in their beauty, and whispered, "I will never be like them." A pang of sadness flickered, but then turned to calm. For it knew true worth wasn't about becoming someone else. The days of hardship had taught it something greater, to accept itself. It smiled, its eyes glistening in the morning sun. "That no longer matters. I am myself, and that is enough." The whisper rang like a vow, carved deep into its soul. A wildflower swayed gently by the pond, as if agreeing with the words. In its small heart, peace finally bloomed. From that day on, the duckling lived happily on the farm. No more mocking voices, only kind greetings. It swam with the flock, taught the young, and shared joy with friends. The heart once lonely was now full of warmth. The little farm itself grew kinder, inspired by its example. Once called ugly, the duckling had now become the pride of the entire farm. Its story reminded everyone that appearance does not define worth. True strength lies in resilience, kindness, and the courage to live as oneself. And so, the different little duck left behind a different ending, one of freedom and happiness. Have you ever heard the story of Cinderella? Everyone knows the magical ball, the glass slipper, and the happily ever after. But what if she never went to the ball at all? What if her path to happiness came not from magic, but from courage and kindness? Today, we will step into the journey of a very different Cinderella. Long ago, in a quiet village on the edge of the kingdom, lived a girl named Cinderella. She was gentle by nature, with eyes that carried warmth even in sorrow. But her life was far from gentle. After her father passed away, her stepmother and two stepsisters stripped her of comfort, forcing her to serve as little more than a maid in her own home. Each morning, before the rooster crowed, she was already awake. She swept the ashes from the hearth, carried buckets of water from the well, scrubbed the wooden floors until her knees ached, and prepared meals she was rarely allowed to share. Her days were heavy with labor, her nights cold with loneliness. Her stepsisters laughed at her ragged clothes and ash-streaked face. They sneered, "Cinderella, ash girl, servant in rags." Their voices echoed through the halls, sharp as whips. She endured each insult with silence, though her heart longed to be seen as more than a shadow. And yet, despite cruelty, she clung to kindness. Birds perched at her window, listening to her soft songs. Mice crept close to share crumbs. In their small eyes, she found comfort. When no one else noticed her, the creatures of the house reminded her she still belonged somewhere. One summer afternoon, a trumpet blared through the streets. A royal messenger cried out, "By decree of His Majesty, every maiden is invited to a grand ball at the palace. The prince shall choose his bride." The village erupted in excitement. Girls dreamed aloud of gowns and golden shoes. Mothers whispered of fortunes to come. The stepsisters squealed with delight. "I will be chosen for my beauty," shouted one. "No, for my charm," cried the other. They demanded silk gowns, glittering jewels, and golden shoes. That night, as she mended lace and polished shoes for her sisters, Cinderella allowed herself a secret dream. Not of marrying the prince, but simply of stepping into the palace, of hearing music swell, of tasting one night of freedom. She whispered, "Just once, I wish I could belong." At last, the night of the ball arrived. The stepsisters pranced in their satin gowns, powdered cheeks gleaming, lips curled in cruel smiles. "Stay here, Ash girl. The prince will never lower his gaze to you," they mocked. Their words fell like stones, but she did not answer. The carriage clattered away, leaving silence behind. In the tale you know, this is when a fairy godmother would arrive, wand glowing with silver light, ready to transform pumpkins and mice into wonders. But that night, no one came. The kitchen remained dark, the air heavy with ash and loneliness. Cinderella sat by the window, chin resting in her hands, gazing at the golden glow of the palace in the distance. She imagined the music spilling into the night, the chandeliers glittering like stars. For a heartbeat, her chest ached with longing so sharp she thought it might break her. The mice scurried into her lap. The birds fluttered onto her shoulder. They chirped softly, as if reminding her she was not forgotten. She stroked their tiny heads and whispered, "Perhaps the ball was never meant for me. Perhaps my path must be different." That night, as the palace lights flickered on the horizon, Cinderella sat in the stillness of her kitchen and made a promise to herself. If no magic would come to change her life, then she must change it with her own two hands. She would not waste her days waiting for miracles. Instead, she would create her own happiness. Slowly, she began to collect scraps of fabric thrown away by her stepsisters, shimmering ribbons torn in haste, fragments of lace tossed aside, faded cloth forgotten in trunks. With nothing but needle and thread, she sewed in the candlelight. Her stitches were clumsy at first, pricking her fingers, but her determination was steady. Night after night, she improved. She stitched together a modest dress from discarded cloth. She crafted simple shoes out of worn leather, polishing them until they shone faintly in the firelight. They were not silk. They were not glass, but they were hers, and each stitch whispered, "You are worthy. You are more than ashes." Soon, her sewing became more than a secret project. She began to repair blankets for villagers, patching tiers so families could stay warm. She mended cloaks for children, adjusting seams so they might last another winter. Each gift was humble, but carried the warmth of her effort. At first, villagers pitied her. The poor ash girl, always covered in soot. But as days passed, pity shifted into admiration. They saw how she gave, even when she had little. They saw how her eyes shone with quiet strength, even when her hands were rough and weary. The children adored her. They clutched the patched dolls she repaired, ran to greet her when she appeared, and called her the kind maiden of ashes. The name once meant to mock her became a title of honor whispered through the village. For the first time in her life, Cinderella felt seen, not by royalty, not by nobility, but by the people around her. Their smiles filled the emptiness in her chest with something brighter than magic. Belonging. One evening, as the sky blazed gold with sunset, she noticed an old man struggling on the road, his basket heavy with goods. Without hesitation, she hurried to his side, lifting the load from his shoulders. "Please, let me help," she said, offering him water and bread she had saved from her own meal. The old man's eyes gleamed. He was no ordinary traveler. In truth, he was the king's advisor, disguised to see how the people lived. He had walked through villages and witnessed vanity, greed, and selfishness. But here, he found a maiden who gave without being asked. "Child," the advisor said softly, "you have little, yet you share freely. You ask for nothing, yet you give much. I have met many maidens, but none whose heart shines as yours does." His words startled Cinderella, but she bowed her head in humility. The advisor smiled. "The king must hear your voice. Come to the palace, not to dance at a ball, but to speak. For a crown may rule a kingdom, but it is hearts like yours that keep it alive." Nervous but resolute, Cinderella stepped through the towering gates of the royal palace a few days later. She wore no silks, no jewels, no crown of pearls, only the simple dress she had stitched by candlelight and the shoes she had polished until they gleamed faintly. Her steps were uncertain at first, but the fire in her eyes burned steady. The courtiers whispered as she entered, surprised by her plain attire. Yet when she bowed before the king, there was no tremor in her voice. "Your Majesty," she said, "a kingdom is not measured by gold or grandeur, but by the way it cares for those who have the least, the hungry, the forgotten, the poor. These are the heart of our land." Her words echoed in the vast hall. The king leaned forward on his throne, intrigued. Few dared to speak so boldly in his presence, yet this maiden did not tremble. She spoke not for herself, but for others. Around the chamber, courtiers who had dismissed her as a ragged girl now listened in silence. The prince, standing at his father's side, felt his heart stir. He had danced with countless maidens at the ball, each draped in beauty and jewels. Yet none had spoken with such conviction. As he watched Cinderella, he realized she was not defined by gowns or riches. She carried a strength deeper than appearance, a radiance that no crown could match. When her stepsisters heard of her presence in the palace, they rushed there, faces painted with disbelief. They expected her to cower under their gaze, to shrink before the king's court. Instead, they saw her honored, her voice commanding respect. Shame colored their cheeks, for the girl they had mocked now stood taller than they ever could. They braced themselves for revenge. Surely she would expose their cruelty, demand their punishment. But Cinderella turned to them with calm eyes. "It is never too late to change," she said softly. "You may choose kindness, just as I have chosen it." Her words fell heavier than anger, piercing deeper than scorn. For the first time, the stepsisters lowered their heads in shame. Outside the palace walls, villagers gathered, cheering the maiden they knew not as a servant, but as the one who had mended their blankets, fed their children, and given them hope. They did not cry her name because of magic. They cried it because of her heart. Their voices rose like a song. Cinderella, the kind maiden of ashes. The king stood, his voice commanding the hall. "Greatness is not found in jewels, nor in beauty, nor in crowns. True greatness is in the heart that dares to care, the spirit that gives without asking in return." His words confirmed what every villager already knew, that this girl carried the strength of a leader within her. The prince stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Cinderella. "I do not wish for the most beautiful bride, nor the wealthiest. I seek a partner who will walk beside me with courage and compassion, and I see that partner in you." His words were simple, but they rang with truth. Gasps filled the chamber. Cinderella lowered her gaze, her heart pounding. Slowly she spoke. "If I am to stand at your side, I must have one promise, that I may continue to serve the people. My joy comes not from palaces, but from lifting those who are bowed low." The prince smiled, his voice steady. "Then together we will serve them. Together we will bring kindness to this kingdom and light to those who dwell in shadow." The hall erupted with applause, not for a romance of beauty and wealth, but for a union built on courage and compassion. And so, Cinderella's story ended not with a slipper of glass, nor with a magical ball, but with the truth she had created herself. Happiness was not given to her by a wand, nor stolen at midnight. It was forged by her resilience, her kindness, and her brave heart. This was a very different Cinderella, one whose worth was never hidden by ashes, and whose light would shine forever. Have you ever heard the story of Aladdin? Everyone remembers the lamp, the 3 wishes, and how a street boy became a prince. But what if Aladdin's very first wish was not for wealth, nor for power, nor for love? What if he chose freedom? Freedom for the genie? Today, we will step into that very different tale, where miracles do not thunder from the sky. They take root in quiet choices, in bread shared while hungry, in names spoken without fear, and in a hand offered to an enemy. This is the story of a city that learned to breathe without magic. Morning poured over Agrabah like molten gold. Hawkers sang, spices pricked the air, carpets rippled like tame waves. Barefoot and bright-eyed, Aladdin slid through camels and baskets. He was poor enough to measure bread by crumbs, yet rich enough to notice who else was hungry. Every kindness he offered returned as a quiet debt in his heart. Under the city wall, traveling merchants whispered about a cave of whispers swallowed by dunes. Inside, they said, lay a dusty lamp, plain clay, yet potent enough to tilt a kingdom's fate. Hope caught Aladdin like a hook. If he could bring change, let it be for more than himself. He followed the stars alone. Sand hissed like snakes around his ankles. Thirst gnawed. Silence magnified doubt. Yet each step answered a promise he had never spoken aloud, that the poor deserve rain. At a lone stone slab, Aladdin pressed his palm. Sand melted like water. A doorway yawned. He entered a hush so ancient it seemed to remember him. Treasures glittered, but only one thing felt alive. A clay lamp, dull brown, hairline cracks mapping its age. He touched it. Dust sighed. Blue fire blossomed. The genie rose, tall as a storm tower, eyes worn by centuries yet bright with mischief. 3 wishes, he rumbled. Choose wisely, little spark. Aladdin's voice was small but steady. If you can grant me anything, then I wish you free. The cavern shook. Invisible shackles snapped like cold glass. The genie gasped, then laughed. A laugh cracked with tears. No one had chosen him in 1,000 years. I am free, the genie said softly. I can grant no more wishes, but I can walk beside you. I remember old ways, truths the wind still keeps. Agrabah had grown brittle. Wells coughed dust. Grain levies fed Vizier Zahir's granaries. Fear tiled the alleys. Princess Layla moved quietly among her people, sharing bread with a gaze that warmed without burning. If I had magic, I would fill the wells, Aladdin said. The genie smiled. You freed me. Now free your city, with courage, not commands. Begin with 3 honest gifts. First, said the genie, share bread while hungry. Second, speak your name without fear. Third, offer your hand even to an enemy. Kingdoms have turned on less. In the market, Aladdin split his meager loaf with a stranger child. Then he climbed a crate and called, My name is Aladdin. Guards stared. Vendors froze. His voice did not tremble. His hunger did. Later, when a soldier fell from his cart, Aladdin bound the bleeding knee. Are you mad? The man whispered. No, Aladdin said, just tired of being enemies. Princess Layla watched. Bread and names are seeds, she said, but drought burns seeds. Aladdin answered, Then we make shade. For the first time, she smiled. Zahir spread word that the lamp commanded water. He meant for the crowd to demand it from Aladdin. But the lamp now held only dust, and a memory no one expected. Aladdin and Layla urged people to hang lanterns in the square, each for what they wished to keep. Family, water, truth. Night bloomed with small suns that did not scorch. The genie added tales of cities that stood without sorcery, and rulers who chose mercy over conquest. Fear cracked like old clay under rain. People leaned toward one another and found they had been neighbors all along. Yet the sky refused mercy. Children coughed dust. Wells rasped. Zahir thundered, "Bring me the lamp, or thirst will teach you obedience." Anger pooled in the streets. Cleaning the lamp, Aladdin found a charred scrap stitched to the inside, a map to the undervein, an ancient buried river. Hope knocked so loudly he feared Zahir could hear it. They set out, Aladdin, Layla, the soldier whose knee he'd bound, a handful of market folk, and the genie, now only a free storyteller. Sand blistered their feet. Mirages mocked them. Lakes shimmered, then vanished. Palaces dissolved into dust. "We chase shadows," someone groaned. "Even shadows," Aladdin said, "prove the sun exists." The genie grinned at that. Desert bandits blocked the pass. "Your water or your lives." Aladdin offered a bargain. "Half our water now. Walk with us to the undervein and drink for years." Curiosity outweighed greed. They followed. At a canyon face, words were carved. "Only those who give in hunger may drink in plenty." Aladdin poured half his skin into a niche. The rock split with a sigh older than kings. Beneath earth, a river sang in the dark. They carved channels with picks and bowls, guiding the song toward Agrabah. Laughter replaced complaint. No sorcery, only hands, blistered and unafraid. Zahir unleashed mercenaries to shatter the channels. The genie stood before them. "One story first," he boomed. He told of an army that dropped swords after learning the enemy had fed them in a winter famine. The mercenaries' blades sagged. Hunger remembered itself inside their bellies. The soldier Aladdin had saved stepped forward. "They spared me. I won't break their water." He stood between squads and citizens. A new border was drawn, loyalty instead of fear. Lanterns flared in the square. Layla read wishes aloud. Family, water, truth. And the crowd chanted them like oaths. The mercenaries, suddenly homesick for their own families, withdrew. Aladdin placed the lamp at Zahir's feet. "It holds no power. What you fear isn't magic. It's people who share bread, speak their names, and offer hands to foes. That cannot be commanded." Zahir's voice cracked. "I was once a hungry boy. Power kept me alive. Without it, I thought I would become nothing again." His hands shook like shutters in a wind. "Then learn a different power," said Aladdin. "Not chains, but work. Join us in the sun. Open the cisterns you hid." He handed Zahir a shovel, not a cell. Water surged back. Children chased one another through sluices. Women sang old mill songs. Elders pressed foreheads to cool stone. Gratitude flowed sideways, from neighbor to neighbor, faster than the river itself. The genie tossed the lamp into the canal. "Power is safest when freed," he said. "You freed me. Now your people free one another." The lamp sank without ceremony. No one mourned it. They named Aladdin keeper of the three gifts. Schools taught children to share bread, to speak their names, to offer hands first. Crime dipped, gossip withered, wells kept singing. "I do not need a prince conjured by magic," Layla said. "I need a partner who ties ropes, shares bread, and tells the truth when the truth is heavy." Perhaps Aladdin, or anyone who lives so. Love arrived as work done side by side. Before he left, the genie sat with children and opened his 1,000-year memory. Palaces risen and sanded away, tyrants outlived by their own statues. mothers who ended wars by sharing soup between lines. "If I have learned anything," he said, "it is that freedom must be used quickly to free another." At dawn, he shouldered a small bag. "Freedom is a river," he told Aladdin. "It must flow." They embraced like brothers. "Tell them," the genie whispered, "that the greatest wish is not granted. It is chosen." Children asked, "Did magic save us?" Elders smiled. "No, bread, truth, and mercy did." And one boy who spent his first wish on another's freedom. Under lanterns that now hung year-round, the city kept breathing, quietly, stubbornly, joyfully. If Aladdin had spent his wishes on wealth or palaces, perhaps he would have lived richly and died admired. Instead, he spent his first wish on a shackled spirit and found a richer fate, a people who could stand without spells, and a city that learned to free itself again and again. The lamp is gone. The river runs. And in Agrabah, the greatest magic is still the simplest, to choose another before oneself. Have you ever heard the story of the Little Mermaid? Everyone remembers the bargain with the sea witch, the stolen voice sealed in a seashell, and the desperate chase to win a prince's heart before the final sunset. But what if things had unfolded differently? What if she had never surrendered her voice at all? What if her path to happiness came not from a bargain of pain and silence, but from the courage to sing her truth? Today, we will step into a very different tide and follow the journey of a mermaid who kept her song. Deep beneath the waves, where coral palaces glimmered like jeweled cathedrals, lived Ariel, a mermaid unlike the rest. She had been told again and again that her voice was a treasure more valuable than pearls. "Trade it for legs," her sisters whispered. "Trade it for love." But Ariel shook her head. Her song was not a coin to be spent, but a part of herself she could never abandon. It carried her dreams, her defiance, and her heart. One night, a storm raged like a beast with iron claws. Waves devoured ships whole, and lightning slashed the sky. Ariel spotted a young prince flung into the sea. Without hesitation, she darted through the fury, lifted him in her arms, and carried him to the sand. His chest rose faintly, life almost gone. Kneeling beside him, Ariel sang, not words, but a melody shaped like sunrise. The boy breathed again. When the prince awoke, the singer was gone. He did not see her shimmering tail, nor her worried eyes, for she had slipped back into the sea before the guards arrived. Yet something remained. Not her face, not her form, only a voice. A voice that lingered like warmth after fire, like dawn remembered in the middle of night. He whispered to himself, "Whoever she is, I will find her." Back in her father's palace, Ariel faced the familiar counsel. "Go to the witch," urged her sisters. "She will grant you legs, and with silence you will walk among men." But Ariel lifted her chin. "I will not cut away my own song. If love is meant for me, it will come through the truth of who I am, not a bargain, not a lie." Her words sank like anchors. In a cavern where eels slithered and candles of bone burned low, Ursula listened. A mermaid refusing to pay the price? Such defiance was dangerous. Ursula had made an empire on bargains, feeding on the desperate. Ariel's refusal to kneel threatened her power. The sea witch smiled, her teeth like knives. "If she will not give me her voice, I will take everything else she loves." Each evening, Ariel rose to a sea rock near the harbor and sang. Fishermen stilled their nets, gulls wheeled above, and the prince, restless in his palace, found excuses to walk the pier at twilight. He did not know her name, but when the wind carried her notes, his heart beat as if it had been waiting. The city whispered of a harbor spirit whose song blessed the tide. The prince ordered his men to search. "Find the singer of the harbor," he commanded. They scoured markets, temples, and taverns. Yet whenever they followed the song to the tide, they found only foam and fading echoes. The mystery deepened. Nobles suggested he forget this fantasy and marry a princess from abroad. But each night, when the harbor wind rose, he swore the melody called his name. News came of the midsummer festival, when lanterns would sail the river and voices would compete for the crown's favor. Ariel, listening from beneath the waves, decided here was her chance to be heard not as a rumor, but as herself. Fear pressed at her, but she held it back. "If he remembers me," she whispered, "let it be by my song under open sky, not by magic's shadow." Unable to steal Ariel's voice, Ursula chose another path. She cloaked herself in glamour, appearing as a radiant noblewoman with eyes like jewels. "If I cannot own the song, I will own the audience," she hissed. With charms and sorcery, she planned to drown Ariel's truth in a tide of lies. The witch would sing, and the prince would not know which heart to trust. Ariel prepared in secret. She sang to dolphins who answered with whistles, to whales whose deep tones taught her harmony. The reef became her conservatory, the tide her metronome. Every note she practiced carried not just skill, but longing. The kind of longing that made the sea itself pause. If courage is a song, she thought, then I must learn to sing bravely. Even the smallest fish gathered, spellbound, to listen. In his chamber, the prince wrestled with doubt. Am I chasing a dream, a phantom spun by salt and wind? He asked his tutor. The old man placed a hand over his shoulder. Dreams fade, he said. But if this voice makes you kinder, steadier, then it is no dream, it is truth. The prince carried those words like armor. He resolved to wait for the festival, heart open. One dusk, Ariel sang from a market balcony, her voice threading through the twilight. The prince, walking below, froze. He knew this sound, like dawn breaking. He rushed toward the quay, heart pounding. But by the time he reached the shore, there was only the last ripple of song and the scatter of gulls. He stared at the waves, whispering, "Come back, whoever you are." Ariel, hidden below, heard every word. That night, Ariel pressed her hand against the water's surface, feeling the moonlight tremble on her skin. I will not barter myself, she vowed softly. I will bring myself, whole, voice and all. If he cannot love me that way, then it was never love at all. The waves rolled in like applause. The sea, ancient and watchful, seemed to approve. Strength swelled in her chest, carrying her toward the festival. The midsummer festival arrived. Lanterns bloomed across the river like floating stars, painting the night in gold and crimson. Crowds gathered, buzzing with expectation. Nobles sat in carved seats. Villagers stood on rooftops. The prince, dressed in silver, took his place as judge. Among the arrivals was a striking woman in glittering robes, Ursula in disguise. She smiled with poison sweetness, determined to outshine whatever voice dared to rise against her. When Ursula sang, the air shimmered unnaturally. Her voice, sharpened with spells, poured like honey over glass. The crowd swayed, lulled by the glamour. Yet the prince frowned. The notes were flawless but hollow, like a painting without soul. His heart stirred with unease. He remembered the storm, the harbor, the dawn song that had saved him. This was not it. This was a mask. Somewhere the true voice still waited. From the shadowed edge of the stage, Ariel stepped forward. Salt still clung to her hair. Her gown, simple and sea green, looked plain beside Ursula's jewels. But when she began, the square hushed. She sang not to impress, but to be known. Her voice carried tides and storms, laughter and ache, all woven into truth. It was no spell, no bargain, just a soul revealed in song. The world leaned closer. Her final note lingered like starlight, and for a heartbeat, no one moved. The silence was not empty, it was listening. Then, slowly, the prince rose from his chair, eyes blazing with recognition. This was it. This was the voice of dawn, the melody that had called him back to life. His chest ached with relief. "I've found you," he whispered, though the roar of the crowd nearly drowned him. Ursula's glamour flickered, unable to withstand the resonance of Ariel's truth. Cracks veined her jeweled facade, revealing shadows beneath. Gasps rippled through the square as people saw two women, one plain but radiant with honesty, the other dazzling but dripping with deceit. The witch snarled, struggling to hold the mask. Yet the crowd was turning, their hearts already swayed, not by sorcery, but by the raw courage of a mermaid who had never silenced herself. Enraged, Ursula dropped her glamour and shrieked, "If the crowd will not be mine, then let them drown." She raised her hands, and a black squall cracked the sky. Lanterns hissed out, boats buckled against the pier. The festival turned to chaos as waves leapt higher than rooftops. The prince drew his sword, useless against the storm. Only Ariel's voice cut through the terror, steady as a lighthouse flame. Ariel stood firm, hair whipping like seaweed, and sang into the gale. Her song did not deny the storm, it reshaped it. Winds bent, curling around her notes, forming a corridor of calm that sheltered the frightened crowd. Boats, moments from capsizing, drifted gently back to safety. Mothers clutched their children. Sailors crossed themselves. They would later swear. It was not steel or fire that saved them, but a song. The prince, though powerless against magic, rallied his men. "Hold the pier! Protect the people!" he shouted. Shields locked, sailors braced against the spray. Side by side with them, he faced the fury, not as a ruler commanding obedience, but as a man standing with his people. He turned toward Ariel, singing amid the storm, and realized this was no fantasy. She was real. She was strength. She was hope. From the deep rose King Triton, trident blazing with wrath. He had felt the storm shake his kingdom. Ready to strike Ursula down, he lifted his weapon. But Ariel raised her hand. "Not with anger, father. Not with hate. Listen." Her voice entwined with the wind, soft yet unyielding. Triton faltered. In his daughter's song he heard not rebellion, but wisdom. Sometimes power lay not in force, but in mercy. Ursula shrilled a dirge, heavy with despair, trying to drag hearts into darkness. Ariel answered with a duet. Her own voice joined with the prince's, one for sea, one for land. Their harmony braided into a bridge no curse could snap. The crowd, first trembling, lifted their voices too. Together, they drowned the witch's lament in truth. Magic cracked. Chains around lost souls shattered like reeds. Light surged through the tide. The waters churned with freed spirits, sailors, merfolk, and wanderers Ursula had bound in contracts. They rose like silver sparks, sighing in relief before drifting to peace. Fishermen felt their nets grow lighter. Coral regained its glow. For the first time, the sea was not divided between bargain and bondage, but cleansed. Ariel watched, tears in her eyes. "Not silence," she whispered, "but song. That is what sets us free." Ursula staggered, her borrowed beauty dissolving. The jeweled gown sagged into tatters, her voice cracked like shattered glass. "Song's end!" she spat, clutching at the air. Ariel lifted her chin and answered with a fearless note, one that rang through water and sky alike. The witch's final disguise splintered. Gasps echoed from the crowd. There was no noblewoman, only a deceiver revealed. The sea itself rejected her, casting her down. Defeated, Ursula shrieked and plunged into a whirlpool of ink. "Remember, songs fade," she cried. Ariel's reply was calm. "Not true ones." The sea closed over the witch, and silence followed, but not emptiness. It was the silence after thunder, the hush that waits for dawn. Ariel's heart trembled, not with fear, but with release. The fight was done. What remained was truth, echoing in every chest that had heard her. Dawn found wreckage and wonder side by side. The square was soaked, the lanterns shattered, but the people were alive. Instead of fear, they spoke of the girl whose song had steadied the sea. Some swore they had seen the tide itself bow to her voice. Children hummed her melody, clinging to parents. Merchants forgot their losses, whispering, the harbor spirit was real. And above it all, Ariel breathed freely. At the quiet waterline, the prince approached Ariel. "I searched for a miracle," he said, voice trembling, "and I found you." Ariel smiled gently. "Not a miracle, just a person who sang instead of hiding." For a moment, the sea was still. They stood not as savior and saved, not as legend and dream, but as two souls finally meeting. The prince reached out, and Ariel took his hand. The prince frowned. "But how can land love sea? How can we share one life?" Ariel looked toward the horizon. "If land learns to listen and sea learns to speak, then we will not be halves, but whole." She shook her head. "I will not cut away my voice. I cannot erase myself for love." The prince nodded slowly, realizing he did not want her silence. He wanted all of her. With Triton's blessing, the sea itself wove a compromise. Foam braided around Ariel's tail, reshaping into legs when she walked ashore, returning to fins when she returned beneath. No bargain, no sacrifice, only a gift freely given. The prince watched in awe. Ariel laughed, the sound like chimes over water. "I will walk with you," she said, "but I will also swim. Both are who I am." In days that followed, land and sea mingled as never before. Markets learned sea songs. Sailors taught lullabies of hills. Children of both worlds played at the waterline, building castles of sand and coral together. Peace was not perfect, but it was growing. And each dusk, Ariel would sing at the harbor, with the prince at her side, their voices braided into something larger than marriage, a bridge between worlds. On the day of their vow, Ariel sang once more, not to dazzle, not to charm, but to remind, love does not require self-erasure. Her song soared through the hall, filling rafters and hearts alike. The prince placed his hand over his heart. "I loved your voice," he said, "because it was you. And I will love you, voice and all, for all my days." Cheers rose, mingled with waves outside. The world had found not a fairy tale, but a truth. Children later asked, was it magic that saved us? Elders smiled. No. Bread, courage, and a girl who refused to trade herself away. Lanterns swayed over the tide, glowing without spells. In the harbor, people sang fragments of Ariel's melody, and the city breathed quietly, stubbornly, joyfully. The sea had not given up its daughter, and the land had not demanded her silence. Love, they learned, was not about losing who you are. It was about finding someone who listens when you sing. And so, Season 1 comes to a close, 5 stories, 5 different turns, and 5 new endings that remind us fairy tales are never truly finished. They live on, reshaped by every what if. We dare to ask, but the journey doesn't end here. Because beyond every page, behind every curtain, and beneath every wave, another question is waiting. Season 2 is coming soon, and the question remains, what if the next twist was the one you never imagined?